Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Activities for People Living at Home with Dementia. We are proud to offer this series with funding from the Area Agency on Aging and the United Way of Tarrant County. These programs are recorded and are made available for viewing through a YouTube channel for future use. I am Martha Brown, your host for today's activities. I am tickled to see what skeletons Peggy Spear is bringing us from the Amon Carter Museum. Peggy, rattle some bones today, will you?
What a good intro, Martha. You are just the top at doing that.
Good morning, Nancy.
You're welcome. Good morning, Nancy.
Hi, Nancy. All right, let me get the pig.
Now, Peggy, do you have a cold today or do you have
Yeah, you know what? So last weekend I flew up to DC. My cousin was getting married. And the second I landed in DC, my voice, it's like an allergy situation. So every year I'm good for it. And I somehow got through the spring without it. And it found me this fall. So I'm totally okay. I sound like I'm struggling, but I am of good health. So
okay, good.
Sorry if it feels a little raspy and you have trouble understanding me. All right, so skeletons. One of those ones, again, where I was like, who knows what we'll find? And we found some really good ones. So all of these are works on paper. None of them are paint. I don't have any paintings and I didn't do any photographs. This first particular, this is an etching, is entitled "And Shoots on Anatomy." So tell me what you say.
It's class learning about anatomy.
You're right. It's a class.
So they have like a almost nude model compared to a skeleton.
Yes. So we've got a model in the flesh, and we've got a skeletal, thing hanging. So what does that make you think? If there's a person in the flesh and a skeleton, what type of class might this be?
What type of what?
Class.
Anatomy?
Anatomy.
It's an anatomy class for art students.
Oh,
Not
okay.
Oh, uh-huh.
Okay. What did you say? Anatomy class and what?
For art students, not medical students.
For art students. Wow.
Yes. So this particular man right here, his name is Anschutz, and Thomas Anschutz, and he was a well-known anatomy art professor from Philadelphia, from PAFA, Philadelphia Academy of Fine Arts. And he came up to New York to teach in one of his past students' class. He was teaching at the New York Arts League. He was teaching, and he pulled in a guest lecturer, and it was his old professor. And so here's the professor, here's a live model, and then here's the skeleton. And this professor was known for having both a flesh model and a skeleton model, so the art students could understand what was underneath the skin as they were starting to draw, paint these figures. And you can see in his hand, he has something in his hand right here. What he would do is he would use clay to then put it on the skeleton to start to build the flesh out to help the artists understand how they can build their bodies out in artwork.
Oh.
Is that why his right leg has flesh looking on it?
Yes, and like up here,
Oh,
you can see some of his rib cage is covered.
Yeah.
So it looks like he's starting to go back in and build out those muscles with his clay.
Now I have to ask you, I can see it's from 1912.
Yes.
There are a lot of women. There probably wouldn't be a lot of women in medicine at that time. Is that right?
You're right. And in art too. And this, you're picking up on something that was kind of cutting edge at the time. Mixed classes in general weren't happening, no matter the content.
ooh.
And so this was sort of a big deal, especially with anatomy, that there was a mixed class of men and women. So you're hitting on something too that was really, while this is painting of there's a history of artists painting anatomy classes, starting from Rembrandt through the ages. This is the first one that that actually show women learning how to paint bodies. So this was pretty cool in the day. And almost every museum that has an American collection in this country has a copy of this etching. This is a pretty important etching in Sloane's career.
So being that this is 1912, that probably is a real skeleton, not a plastic one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yes.
Is that a curtain on the wall, far wall?
Right here.
Yes.
Yeah, that might be something like a dressing room for that model.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And then you can see the light. There's a light source up here too that, again, helps with the creating muscle and body and mass with a light as an artist. We're able to see too a few artists that are recognizable. So Sloane ran in a group. We've talked about this group before. We touched on it, the Ashcan group. And they were artists. Bellows was in that group. He's the one that's done the boxing scenes or the polo match scenes. Henry, this was actually Henry's class. And Sloane was sitting in on this class.
Oh, okay.
Another artist. But there's about 7 or 8 people we can identify. So if you look to the right, there's a man on the top edge of the paper.
Hmm.
That's Sloane. That's the artist of this particular etching right here. Next to him is identified as Robert Henry. This was the man whose class it was that he was allowing the lecturer to come talk to. And then on the other side of him, sorry, my mouse keeps disappearing, right here, that's George Bellows. And that was, we've seen a lot of George Bellows' work. He painted the fisherman. He's done the boxing scenes, the beach scenes. He's done a lot of the kind of the grit and underbelly of New York City scene. And then the wife of Henry's right here, this woman sitting down, and Sloane, the artist's wife, is pictured here, but I'm not sure which woman she is. So he's including his best friends and those in the same art movement as him in this kind of like a snapshot of what that class looked like.
Exactly. So I wonder if his title of his class is "Have Skeleton Will Travel."
Yeah, he just jumped on an Amtrak and got a chair for
right.
his skeleton friend.
Put
Was
it
up
in
from Philly to New York in no time.
We're going
I'm
to
actually surprised of the size of the class, because over there to the right, there are a lot of people clustered in there.
It's huge, and you can even see the illusion of people on the other side. Often these classes would probably have been taught in the round. And if you look at the history of some of these other art classes on anatomy, it almost sometimes looks like they're in a medical classroom where they're all gathered. You're sitting around in a circle.
Oh, like a medical theater?
Yeah, like that.
exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, and because Thomas Anschutz was the end all be all in the art world for teaching anatomy, I'm sure a lot of New York artists or even artists in that Northeast region were excited and able to get to see him teach, and not down in Philadelphia.
This
Right.
had
go
to be
ahead.
a really popular, a sought after ticket, as it were,
Yeah,
to get into.
especially if it was through the New York School of Art. That those were like the creme de la creme. So you were getting such good instruction with a lot of artists who had already established themselves were in on that class too. So how cool.
Peggy, do you think that the portrayal of the people on the right-hand side was actual, or was he giving a nod and the tip of the hat to these people by adding them? Or do you know? My
hunch is that they were probably there because a lot of them I mean, one of them was a student of this professor, and Sloan was not the professor of this class, but he's the one that's etching this class. So I actually think a lot of these people were there.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, just because, I mean, how close that group was in general.
Uh-huh.
All right, so we see our skeleton here. Here's a for the purpose of learning skeleton. Now we've got our skeleton of death.
That's funny.
So this particular etching or lithograph, excuse me, is by an artist we've looked at before, Mabel Dwight. She lived in New York, and she was the one, if you can recall, that did the picture of all the different families in the waiting room at the doctor's office.
Oh,
and
yeah?
the
Oh,
one,
yes.
and the one of everybody looking at the pretty orange fish. The fish were orange, but everything else was black and white at the aquarium. This is that same artist. So she had a very satirical angle to a lot of her work. She was, capturing the urban life was a lot of what she did. And so here, this was in between the wars, she's commenting on the men who were profiting from the business of war.
Yeah.
So you can see, we know we're in an urban setting. You can see tall buildings behind us or behind them with windows. We know it's during the industrial uptick in the country. We see these smokestacks with the smoke in the sky. And then you see these wealthy men. This was painted during the Depression, or created during the Depression, which there was, a lot of this art was being made and kind of ignored during the time. And it wasn't until after the Depression that a lot of these artworks became more interesting for art historians, because it's now looking back on the psyche of what the country was during that time. And so she's got a bunch of really kind of shifty looking characters.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they transition into vultures. And they're following, it's the death of people that they're making money off of. And he's got kind of like leading the parade. Maybe it's a tie to Satan. They've sold their soul to the devil. I mean, there's a lot of ways people at the time would have understood the rich are getting richer while people are losing their lives, their families, things like that.
I wonder why he's wearing spurs, the skeleton.
I know, I couldn't find anything on that. I thought that was an interesting inclusion. I mean, it could be like one of the horsemen of the apocalypse in my mind.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
But I don't know. And I love what are they called? Epaulets? Just
Yeah, epaulets, yeah.
Epaulets, yeah.
Casually on his shoulders.
Mm-hmm. And the medals.
And
Yeah.
the medals.
Yeah, so not a ton has been written about this particular artwork, but it's referenced a lot when you research Mabel Dwight. And this was towards the end of her life, I believe. And so she believed that urban growth and optimism was a good thing, but she's here commenting on the kind of the political and the social implications that came with urban growth. So, but they're kind of creepy. Like this guy really was spooky.
Right.
Yes.
They all have nice top hats. And
Yep.
the skeleton looks like a bearskin hat,
Yep,
like the
exactly.
Buckingham Palace wear.
Yeah.
Drum major's hat.
Actually,
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
I just looked her up. She died in 55.
Yes. Okay. So she had, it was right around this time she had severe asthma that kind of knocked her out of the game.
Ah,
And it was about this time she was kind of on the descend of her career.
okay.
So
I'm interested to look at the shadows on the lower right corner, creeping toward the people.
oh, what an
Wow.
interesting detail, Martha. Yeah. And they don't really look like anything else we're seeing.
No.
It almost looks like hands pointing at them.
That's what I think. It looks like fingers pointing.
Oh,
that
it does. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Thanks, Myra. Yeah, we're all pointing to him and say, evil, evil.
Evil, right?
And
And you know, the speaking of the shadows, you hit on an interesting detail. So now we notice the skeleton, and they're all in the shadow of the skeleton, kind of like they're all in that.
Mm.
Ah,
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
So, all right, so now we've got our scary skeleton out of the way.
Oh, I think it's fun.
Yes.
All right, so yeah, it's fun, and she was known for being funny, so there was some satire in her. I mean, because he seems like he's having a grand old time. He almost looks like he's smiling.
Mhm.
All right, so this one should be before the last one. The one I slipped it in the wrong spot. So I'm sure many of you heard of Jose Posada. He was a Mexican print artist, and it wasn't until after he died that he really became as famous as he is.
Yeah.
But what he was known for was his skeletons, his calaveras. And so, have you guys heard of Posada before?
I have not.
I
Okay,
don't think
when I
so.
show you some of his skeletons, you'll recognize exactly who he is. I mean, I know this looks grainy here, but we have a bunch in our collection, which begs the question, you know, we're an American art museum. What does American art mean? Does it mean North America? Does it mean USA? Does it mean people who have immigrated from other countries but identified as an American? So, you know, this is one of those conversations where we have a bunch of Posadas in our collection, and we love to celebrate these Posada works whenever we can because they're just stunning. But he
So-
was oh yeah.
So do I understand that the stuff up at top says, looks like there's instructions for making tortillas?
No, I don't. I have not gone through and translated this. But what he did,
Dedicated to the places that make tortillas and vegetables and
blouses and
Genta
shop owners,
Luca.
those are people who fight. I think when I translated it, fighters. I don't really
Okay.
know.
Hmm.
Interesting.
But these are all different people. Yes, this is a woman is selling tortillas in this particular image on the top left. But he was capturing the everyday person in the marketplace is generally what these, and it says una calavera chusca, which translates to more or less, a woman on staff is from Chile, and we were talking, and she said, it's not a perfect translation, but kind of the playful skeleton is what she agreed that might kind of best translate.
Ooh.
And so it's all the different things that these skeletons or that people in Mexico would do. And he moved to Mexico City in 1988. And this was created, you know, he created these characters after he moved to Mexico City. And these are the characters now that really made him famous after he passed away, and now have kind of identified with Dia de los Muertos. Skeletons.
Ah, yes.
So we'll look at some of the closer details. This is an etching, and his printer was someone he met, I think, when he was down in Mexico City, and his printer then worked closely with him. So I didn't list the printer's name, but all of his work was being done with this printer. So a lot of kudos is to this.
So Peggy,
Yeah.
I've heard of etchings before, but I've never heard of zinc being used in etchings.
You know, I don't know much about this process either, but I know that it was Posada deliberately used print baking because it was cheap, it was quick, and it was accessible. So he could get his art to the masses with no problem. Everybody was able to enjoy this art. There was no class that he wasn't trying to reach the elite. He was trying to reach everyone. And so that was part of the reason a lot of his subjects were political or cultural, and things that people could identify with regardless of your footing. So here we've got a skeleton who's selling hot liquids is what I've been able to find. It's very vague. Selling hot liquids out of basins.
Huh.
See his ladle.
Yeah.
But not a threatening skeleton, a fun skeleton. And then here we've got this particular woman is selling cheese.
Ooh.
And you can see the hat and the skirt. He would, include accents that were identifiable to certain types of classes or people. Here, this skeleton has liquor he's serving.
These all come from the orange pages?
Yes, yeah, this is all from that Calavera Chusca series.
Ah, okay.
You can see here, down here is the basin,
Oh, all
and
right.
over here is the cheese cellar. And we've got, where's the other one? The alcohol vendor over here.
Where's Andrew?
And then here, we're gonna look at the fish one. This man right here is selling fish. So these were meant to be very, happy and kind of comical, and, sometimes had some sort of jab at whoever political, but it was really meant to be something that Mexicans could see and identify with. And he died penniless. I mean, he was identified by his neighbors, and only one of the 3 neighbors that identified him knew his last name. So, I mean, and he was buried in an unmarked grave. So there's, he kind of, he left us in a sad way, but then it wasn't until the 1920s later in the 1920s that he was rediscovered and celebrated as a true Mexican artist.
So I mean,
was
Mexico celebrates the Day of the Dead,
Mhm.
and skeletons are a big part of the theme of that celebration. So was he just doing this for every day, or is it specific to? Okay.
So he did these, this was something he was always doing, and he was a prolific printmaker, thousands and thousands and thousands of prints. No one knows the exact number, but some estimates around 20,000.
Wow.
So these were things he was constantly making, and after his death, it was then people started associating the skeletons with Dia de los Muertos. So a lot of what you see tied to Dia de los Muertos is rooted in what Posada had created.
Now, Peggy, if you go back to that orange page,
Yes.
is that story underneath each picture, or
Yes.
words, or what is it?
Yeah, I think some of these are like poems about maybe the work that these different skeletons were doing. But these were, a lot of his skeletons would appear for the first time in these broadsides and these cheap papers that were distributed around town. So there is often a story associated with his image.
And would he write it, or did somebody else write it? Do you know?
I think someone else wrote it. I'm not sure so much about the literature associated with some of these, with his skeletons. But I feel like a lot of the political ones he would assign, he wasn't reacting to something someone was writing. He was creating a lot of what the message was. So yeah, so this is, and these are, were pretty large broadsides. I don't have the size for this one, but they were like 11 by 18. They were pretty big, like newspaper-esque type publication. So you'll keep your eyes out now for the next week or so. You might see some calaveras a la Posada around. We got one more. This is another death-related one, but in a tongue-in-cheek way. We've looked at this particular cartoonist before. His name is Hal Kaufman, and he was from California, but he went to Austin and decided he was a Texan for life, and ended up working for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram for most of his career, but had some of his cartoons appear in other publications around the country. And so he was the one, if you remember, on, I think it was Memorial Day or Labor Day, that was like water deaths, 100, like he was real negative about the traffic and the water deaths related to those holidays. Here's another upbeat one. Go on, take a chance, you can make it. And it's just him, you know, the Father Death just encouraging this man to get it. So kind of funny on a Halloween weekend, kind of morbid, but hey, what do you expect with a skeleton?
Mhm.
So next week, those are all of our skeletons this week. Next week, we're back with fire because hopefully we're hitting fireplace season and none of this 80-degree nonsense that we've been living with the last couple of weeks.
Are you saying fire?
Yes, fire.
Oh,
So we've got quite a number of artworks, particularly photographs in our collection that deal with all the different associations you can have with fire. So
mhm.
take a look at those.
Well, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was one of those things again where I was delving into our collection. I was like, dang, we have a lot of really interesting perspectives on or inclusions of fire, both good and bad in our collection. So,
Peggy, can you take a couple of minutes, please, and let us know how the 60th celebration went? I was not there and I'm sorry I missed it.
oh, you know what? It was 10,000 people registered, and we ended up having about 4,000 people come, and it was a really fun night.
Good.
And we had a couple of bands. We had a DJ and a band play, and we had fireworks at the end of it all. So it was like a real birthday celebration. But it was really cool because we got a lot of new people who'd never been to the museum to come, and or old friends that just haven't been since everything with COVID. So it felt crowded but not overwhelming the whole time. And we had food trucks. There were like 8 food trucks there. So people were snacking and dancing and art making. And so it was a really, everyone was really happy with how it went. So we're coming back next year. We're going to have Party on the Porch again next year. So it will be something I think that we continually do again. We used to do it before the pandemic, and then we kind of stopped and rethought, and now we're back with it. So
Good.
Thank you for sharing.
yeah,
Yes.
you'll be there next year.
Yeah.
Oh, right, yes.
For
All right,
60
friends, well, have a good week. Have a happy
Thank you,
holiday
Peggy.
Thank you,
I will
Peggy.
Peggy.
next week. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, let's take a look and see what's coming up tomorrow. Here's Peggy and Skeletons. Tomorrow is Moving to Heal. So we're gonna get our bodies moving and warm. I need a little more suppleness in my joints. What do y'all think?
I
Everybody.
agree.
Yes, we can use that, can't we?
Yes.
All right. Well, it is time now for Fifth Street Cafe. So I'm going to say goodbye to our recording so we can talk amongst ourselves.